"Get that dog out of here," he yelled, but it knew the truth. Arthur Wilkins slammed the morning newspaper down on his kitchen table, the sudden noise echoing through the empty house. 6 months since Margaret's passing, and the silence still felt wrong. The kitchen clock ticked mechanically, counting seconds that stretched into hours in this hollow space he once called home. At 72, Arthur had grown accustomed to the routine that filled his days. Coffee at 6, newspaper by 6:30, staring at the crossword puzzle but rarely completing it. Margaret had been the word wizard. Now, half-finished puzzles accumulated in a stack by the recycling bin. He shuffled to the front door in his faded plaid robe and worn slippers, ready for his daily ritual of retrieving the mail. A task that once seemed insignificant, but now structured his formless days. The crisp October air bit at his skin as he pulled open the door, the hinges creaking in protest. That's when he saw it, a scraggly mutt, all bones and matted fur, curled up on his welcome mat. The dog lifted its head, revealing eyes that held a depth of weariness Arthur recognized all too well. "Get that dog out of here," he yelled, his voice cracking from disuse. The animal flinched but didn't run. It simply stared, as if trying to communicate something Arthur couldn't or wouldn't understand. "Go on, get!" He waved his arms, feeling foolish as Mrs. Patterson from across the street paused her gardening to observe the spectacle. The last thing he needed was neighborhood gossip about crazy old Arthur Wilkins yelling at strays. The dog stood, stretched, and limped down the porch steps, disappearing around the corner of the house. Arthur exhaled, relieved yet somehow disappointed. He grabbed the mail, bills and flyers, nothing more, and retreated inside. Later that afternoon, as Arthur microwaved a frozen dinner, lasagna, Margaret's favorite, he glanced out the kitchen window. The dog had returned, sitting patiently by the back door, its ribs visible through patchy fur. "Persistent little pest," Arthur muttered, but something made him pause. The kitchen suddenly felt colder, emptier. Margaret would have already invited the creature in, wrapped it in a towel and started heating milk. "You've got too big a heart, Maggie," he'd always told her. "And you've got too small a one," she'd tease back, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Arthur closed the blinds. The microwave beeped. He ate standing up, facing the wall, ignoring the occasional scratching sound from outside. That night, rain pounded against the roof, a torrential downpour that matched Arthur's mood. He tried to focus on the television, some mindless game show, but his thoughts kept drifting to the dog. Probably found shelter somewhere, he reasoned. Not his problem. At midnight, Arthur gave up on sleep. The empty side of the bed mocked him, the sheets cold where Margaret's warmth once radiated. Lightning flashed, illuminating the bedroom in stark white before plunging it back into darkness. In that brief moment of light, Arthur caught sight of Margaret's photograph on the nightstand, her smile frozen in time. "What would you do, Maggie?" he whispered to the darkness. The answer came with another flash of lightning. She would help. Arthur threw on his raincoat and grabbed a flashlight from the drawer. Outside, the rain assaulted him from all directions as he swept the beam of light across the yard. "Dog!" he called, feeling ridiculous. "Where are you?" A soft whimper led him to the hydrangea bushes, Margaret's pride and joy, where the animal huddled, soaked and shivering. Arthur hesitated, raindrops running down his face like tears he hadn't shed in months. "Come on then," he finally said, his voice barely audible above the storm. "Just for tonight." The dog didn't move, eyeing him warily. Arthur sighed, crouching down, despite the protest from his arthritic knees. "Look, I'm sorry I yelled," he said, the words feeling strange in his mouth. When was the last time he'd apologized to anyone? "You can come inside, it's warm there." Slowly, as if understanding every word, the dog crawled from its hiding place. Arthur didn't pick it up, he wasn't ready for that. But he led the way back to the house, glancing over his shoulder to make sure the dog followed. Inside, Arthur grabbed a towel from the linen closet, one of the old ones, not the good set Margaret reserved for guests. He placed it in the corner of the kitchen, creating a makeshift bed. Just for tonight, he repeated, more to himself than to the dog, who was already settling onto the towel, eyes fixed on Arthur with what looked strangely like gratitude. Arthur returned to his bedroom, closing the door firmly behind him. But as he lay in the dark, listening to the storm rage outside, he realized the house didn't feel quite so empty anymore. Morning arrived with streams of sunlight cutting through the blinds, painting stripes across Arthur's face. He blinked awake, momentarily disoriented until memory flooded back. The storm, the dog, his midnight moment of weakness. Probably made a mess of the kitchen, he grumbled, pulling himself out of bed. His joints ached more than usual, punishment for last night's rain-soaked rescue mission. In the kitchen, Arthur found not chaos, but the dog sitting perfectly still on the towel, watching the door as if waiting for permission to move. The animal's fur had dried overnight into tufts that stuck out at odd angles, and in the daylight, Arthur could see patches where it had been missing altogether, old scars telling silent stories. "I suppose you're hungry," Arthur said, his voice gruff. The dog's ears perked up at the sound, and its tail thumped once against the floor. Arthur opened the refrigerator, surveying the sparse contents. He settled on some leftover meatloaf, cutting off a small piece and placing it on a paper plate. Setting it on the floor, he stepped back, watching as the dog approached cautiously. "Go on," Arthur urged. "It's not poisoned." The dog sniffed the offering, then looked up at Arthur as if seeking further reassurance. "For God's sake, eat the food," Arthur said, exasperated. Only then did the dog begin to eat, slowly at first, then with increasing eagerness. While the dog ate, Arthur prepared his coffee, the familiar routine grounding him. He noticed a small puddle by the back door. The dog had needed to go out, but hadn't disturbed him. More considerate than some humans he knew. "I suppose we should see if you belong to someone," Arthur said, searching for his phone. When was the last time he'd used it? The battery was nearly dead, neglected like so much else in his life. After charging it enough to function, Arthur snapped a quick photo of the dog and posted it on the neighborhood social media group Margaret had insisted he join. "Found dog," he typed, adding his address before putting the phone down, uncomfortable with the technology. Arthur spent the morning on his usual routine, hyper-aware of the dog's presence. It followed him from room to room, maintaining a respectful distance. When Arthur sat in his armchair with the crossword, the dog settled nearby, watching with those unnerving eyes. 7 letters, deeply felt emotion, Arthur muttered. The answer, passion, eluded him. The doorbell rang, startling them both. The dog retreated to the kitchen while Arthur answered the door, finding Jenny, his daughter, on the porch. Her visits had become less frequent since the funeral, her discomfort with his grief painfully obvious. "Dad," she said, her smile too bright. "I was in the neighborhood and thought I'd stop by." Arthur knew she lived 30 minutes away. This was a deliberate trip, not a casual drop-in. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. Jenny's gaze swept the living room, assessing. Arthur saw it through her eyes, dust gathering on picture frames, dishes from yesterday still on the coffee table, curtains that hadn't been opened in days. "How are you doing?" she asked, the question loaded with unspoken concern. Before Arthur could answer, a soft clicking of nails on hardwood announced the dog's approach. Jenny's eyes widened. "You got a dog?" The surprise in her voice bordered on shock. "No," Arthur said quickly. "It's temporary. Found it outside during the storm last night." Jenny knelt, offering her hand to the dog, who approached with that same careful hesitation it had shown Arthur. "Poor thing, looks like it's been through a lot. I posted a picture online. Someone will claim it." Jenny's eyes met his, a spark of something, hope, flaring briefly. "And if no one does?" Arthur looked away. "Someone will." Ooh. They sat at the kitchen table, Jenny chattering about her job, her husband, everything but what Arthur knew was on her mind, her worry about him wasting away in this mausoleum of memories. The dog settled at Arthur's feet, a warmth against his ankle. Arthur found himself absently reaching down, fingers brushing against fur. The dog leaned into his touch, and something in Arthur's chest loosened just slightly. When Jenny left, she hugged him tighter than usual. "The dog's good for you," she whispered. "Consider keeping it." Arthur watched her drive away, the dog now standing beside him in the doorway. "She thinks you're some kind of therapy," he told the animal. The dog tilted its head, those eyes seeing too much. "Well, she's wrong. I don't need fixing." But that night, when Arthur placed a fresh towel in the kitchen corner, he didn't say, "Just for tonight." Instead, he found himself murmuring, "Sleep well," before turning out the light. A week passed, then two. No one claimed the dog, despite Arthur's posts and the flyers Jenny had insisted on creating and distributing around the neighborhood. The temporary arrangements stretched on, and routines shifted subtly to accommodate a second heartbeat in the house. Arthur named him Max, simple, dignified, nothing too cutesy. He refused to admit it was a proper name rather than a temporary label. Max had been Margaret's father's name. It felt right somehow. Max gained weight, his ribs no longer painfully visible. A visit to the vet, Arthur's first outing beyond the grocery store in months, revealed no microchip and an estimated age of around 6 years. "He's been on his own for quite a while," the vet had said, examining the healed injuries and scars. "But he's remarkably trusting. Dogs know good people when they meet them." Arthur had scoffed, but the words lingered. On a crisp November morning, Arthur found himself doing something he hadn't done since Margaret's death, filling a bird feeder in the backyard. Max watched from the patio, alert but calm as sparrows and chickadees fluttered around them. Margaret loved birds, Arthur told Max, surprised by how easily he spoke her name. She kept a journal of every species that visited, hundreds of entries. He paused, realizing he'd abandoned her careful documentation. Another failure. Max moved closer, pressing against Arthur's leg, as if sensing the downward spiral of his thoughts. The phone rang inside, Jenny's weekly check-in. These calls had become less awkward since Max's arrival, giving them neutral territory to discuss. "We're doing fine," Arthur said, the "we" slipping out before he could catch it. "Max is helping with the garden." "The garden?" Jenny's surprise was audible. "Dad, that's wonderful." And then Arthur looked out the window at the overgrown beds Margaret had tended so carefully. "It needs work, but it's a start." After the call, Arthur found himself in the garage, searching for Margaret's gardening tools. The smell of potting soil and fertilizer hit him like a physical force, memories flooding back. Margaret singing off-key while she planted, her wide-brimmed hat shielding her face from the sun, her laughter when he complained about the dirt she tracked into the house. His hands shook as he lifted her favorite trowel, still caked with dried soil from the last time she used it. Arthur sank onto the workbench, the grief he'd been out running finally catching up. Max appeared in the doorway, hesitating as if asking permission to enter this sacred space. When Arthur didn't object, the dog approached, resting his head on Arthur's knee. "I miss her," Arthur whispered, his voice breaking. "Every day, every hour. It doesn't get easier. Everyone says it will, but it doesn't." Max didn't offer platitudes or uncomfortable reassurances like humans did. He simply stayed, a steady presence, as Arthur's tears fell for the first time since the funeral. Later, Arthur found himself in the front yard with Margaret's tools, Max lying nearby as he cleared weeds from a flower bed. Mrs. Patterson, who had avoided direct interaction since his shouting episode, approached cautiously. "Your hydrangeas need pruning if you want blooms next year," she said, hands fidgeting with her gardening gloves. Arthur straightened, wincing at the pain in his back. "Margaret always handled that. I wouldn't know where to start." Mrs. Patterson's expression softened. "I could show you. Margaret gave me cuttings from those bushes years ago. Least I could do is help maintain the mother plants." Arthur hesitated, his instinct to refuse battling with the knowledge that Margaret would want her beloved hydrangeas properly cared for. "I'd appreciate that," he finally said. As Mrs. Patterson demonstrated the proper pruning technique, other neighbors gradually emerged. Tom Wilson from next door offering to help clear leaves, Sarah Johnson commenting on how good it was to see Arthur outside again. Max moved comfortably among them, accepting pets and treats, bridging conversations when Arthur's social muscles faltered from disuse. By late afternoon, what had begun as a simple gardening task had transformed into an impromptu gathering. Someone brought lemonade, someone else retrieved lawn chairs from a garage. Arthur found himself at the center of a community he'd been part of for decades, but had walled himself off from in his grief. "That's quite a special dog you've got," Tom commented as the group began to disperse. "Smart fellow, knows exactly who needs him." Arthur watched Max navigating the yard, checking in with him periodically, as if making sure he was okay. "He found me, not the other way around." "Sometimes that's how it works," Tom replied. "The good things find us when we're too stubborn to go looking for them ourselves." That night, Arthur moved Max's bed from the kitchen to the bedroom. The dog curled up on the new bed, but after Arthur turned out the lights, he felt a gentle weight settle at his feet. He didn't have the heart to object. "She would have loved you," Arthur whispered into the darkness. Max shifted closer, and for the first time in months, Arthur slept through the night. Winter descended on the neighborhood, transforming Margaret's garden into a landscape of crystalline white. Arthur found himself taking Max for walks twice daily, despite the cold. Short excursions at first, then gradually longer, as both his physical strength and his willingness to engage with the world increased. These walks became a barometer of his healing. In the beginning, Arthur nodded stiffly at neighbors, offering minimal responses to their greetings. By December, he was stopping for conversations, even accepting an invitation to the Wilsons' holiday gathering, his first social event since Margaret's passing. "I don't know if I'm ready," he confessed to Max as he stood before the mirror, adjusting a tie he hadn't worn in months. The dog watched from the bed, head tilted in that questioning way that always made Arthur feel understood. The evening proved less overwhelming than feared. Max, who Tom had insisted was welcome, stayed close, creating natural openings for conversation when words failed Arthur. People asked about the dog, rather than immediately diving into uncomfortable expressions of sympathy. "He's changed you," Jenny remarked when she visited for Christmas, watching Arthur and Max return from their morning walk, both invigorated by the cold air. "In a good way." Arthur might have bristled at the comment once, defensive about any suggestion that he needed changing. Now, he simply nodded. "He makes me stick to a schedule. Dogs need consistency. And people don't?" Jenny's smile was gentle, without judgment. Arthur considered this as he prepared coffee. "Your mother was my consistency," he admitted. "When she died, I didn't see the point in maintaining routines for just myself. And now—" Arthur glanced at Max, who had settled in his favorite spot by the heating vent. "Now I have a responsibility again." Jenny reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "That goes both ways, Dad. He relies on you, but you rely on him too. That's not weakness, it's being human." January brought fierce snowstorms that confined them indoors for days. Arthur unearthed board games from the closet, playing solitaire versions while Max watched. He found Margaret's recipe box, attempting her famous beef stew with moderate success. The kitchen smelled like her again, if only briefly. One evening, as snow pelted the windows, Arthur sorted through a box of photographs he'd avoided since the funeral. Max lay beside him on the couch, occasionally nudging specific photos with his nose, as if highlighting memories that deserved attention. "This was our first house," Arthur explained, holding up a faded image of a young couple standing proudly before a modest bungalow. "Barely more than a shack, but we thought it was a palace." He continued through the photos, narrating their life together for Max's attentive ears. Vacations, Jenny's childhood, holidays, ordinary moments that had seemed unremarkable until they became irretrievable. "I was afraid I'd forget her," Arthur confessed, arranging the photos in chronological order. "That's why I couldn't look at these, but the opposite happened. I was forgetting how to live with her memory, not how to remember her." Max rested his head on Arthur's lap as if in understanding. In February, A pipe burst in Mrs. Patterson's basement while she was visiting her daughter in Florida. Arthur discovered the issue during a walk when Max stopped, refusing to move past her house, barking insistently until Arthur investigated and heard water running. The incident circulated through the neighborhood as Max's heroic rescue, elevating the dog to local celebrity status. More importantly, it cemented Arthur's reintegration into the community. Neighbors began consulting him about home repairs, skills from his contractor days that had lain dormant in retirement. Arthur found himself busy, needed, engaged in a way he hadn't been since closing his business 5 years earlier. Spring arrived with gentle persistence, coaxing green shoots from the soil Margaret had nurtured for decades. Arthur and Max spent weekends in the garden, planting according to Margaret's meticulous notes. Sometimes Arthur spoke to her as he worked, telling her about Max, about Jenny's pregnancy, their first grandchild due in summer, about the ways life continued to unfold even when it seemed impossible that it could. On the anniversary of the day Max appeared on his porch, Arthur took him to the pet store, allowing him to select a proper bed to replace the increasingly shabby towel arrangement. Max chose a plush, donut-shaped bed that Arthur would have dismissed as too indulgent 6 months earlier. "You've earned it," he told the dog as they returned home. "1 year of putting up with a grumpy old man." That evening, as they sat on the porch watching twilight settle over the neighborhood, Jenny arrived unexpectedly, carrying a small gift bag. "What's this?" Arthur asked as she joined them, bending to greet Max before handing over the bag. "Open it." Inside, Arthur found a dog tag engraved with Max's name and Arthur's address and phone number. The sight of it, this official acknowledgement of permanence, brought a lump to his throat. "I thought it was time," Jenny said softly. "He's yours, Dad." "He always was." Arthur ran his thumb over the engraving. "He knew before I did," he said. "That first day, when I yelled at him to leave, he understood something I didn't." "What was that?" Jenny asked. Arthur gazed at Max, who returned his look with that same steady patience he'd shown from the beginning, that sometimes what we push away the hardest is exactly what we need the most. As dusk deepened into night, the three of them remained on the porch. The silence that fell between them was comfortable now, no longer the oppressive void Arthur had been drowning in a year ago. Somewhere in the distance, wind chimes rang out, similar to the ones Margaret had hung in their garden, taken down after her death because their music had been too painful to bear. "I think I'll get new wind chimes tomorrow," Arthur said, surprising himself with the decision. "For the garden." Jenny squeezed his hand in silent understanding. Max shifted, resting his head on Arthur's foot, a warm anchor to the present moment. Arthur reached down to stroke the dog's ear, feeling gratitude wash over him for this creature who had appeared when he was at his lowest, who had waited out his anger and grief with inexplicable patience. "Get that dog out of here," he had yelled that first day. But Max had known better. He had seen past the walls of Arthur's pain to the heart still beating beneath, a heart capable of healing, of connecting, of loving again. And in that simple wisdom lay the truth that had saved them both.